The courtroom was already full before the bailiff called the room to order. Whispers drifted through the gallery like restless wind. Reporters lined the back wall, legal pads ready. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but everyone knew that whatever happened in this room would not stay here for long. At the center of it all sat a woman who once believed she controlled everything. Karen Whitmore had built her reputation on authority. In her neighborhood, in her workplace, in every room she entered, she had demanded obedience. Rules were her weapon. Intimidation was her shield. And for years, no one had dared to challenge her until the day someone finally did. All rise. The judge entered, calm and composed, her presence alone enough to silence the tension. At the bench sat Judge Judy, a woman known not for theatrics, but for precision. She didn't shout to command attention. She didn't need to. Everyone rose. Karen stood stiffly at the plaintiff's table. Across from her sat Lillian Harper, soft-spoken, silver-haired, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked nothing like the villain Karen had described in her complaint, but appearances, as this court would soon prove, meant very little. Karen had filed the lawsuit herself. She claimed harassment, emotional distress, and defamation. She insisted that Lillian had maliciously targeted her, damaged her reputation, and incited neighbors against her. It sounded serious, but when Judge Judy began asking questions, the story shifted. Ms. Whitmore, the judge said evenly, what exactly did the defendant do to you? Karen lifted her chin. She provoked the situation. She refused to comply with community guidelines. When I addressed the issue, she recorded me without consent and posted it online. That video destroyed my life. The courtroom grew still. And what were you addressing? The judge asked. Karen hesitated, just for a moment. Noise violations, landscaping violations, improper use of shared property. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. And you are? The HOA president, Karen replied, as though that explained everything. A faint murmur moved through the room. Lillian's attorney stood. Your Honor, may we play the footage in question? The judge nodded. The screen flickered to life. The video began mid-conversation. Karen stood in front of Lillian's home, arms crossed, voice raised. She spoke of fines, penalties, legal action. She accused Lillian of intentionally disrupting the peace. Then came the laughter, sharp, mocking, dismissive. Karen laughed when Lillian tried to explain that her grandchildren had been playing in the yard. She laughed when Lillian said she couldn't afford the fines. She laughed when neighbors stepped outside to watch, and then she said the words that would echo far beyond that street. People like you always think the rules don't apply. The courtroom remained silent as the video ended. Judge Judy turned back to Karen. Did you say that? Karen shifted in her seat. It was taken out of context. Out of context, the judge repeated calmly. In what context is that appropriate? Karen's attorney attempted to interject, but the judge raised a hand. Ms. Whitmore, she continued, you filed this lawsuit claiming you were defamed. But what I see here is you enforcing authority with contempt. Karen's composure began to crack. She embarrassed me publicly. No, Judge Judy replied. You embarrassed yourself. The words landed heavily. Lillian was called to testify. She spoke quietly, without theatrics. She explained that the neighborhood had long tolerated Karen's strict enforcement until it crossed into harassment. She described daily notices taped to her door, threats of escalating fines, warnings about children laughing too loudly. I recorded her, Lillian admitted, because no one believed how she spoke to us. And what happened after you posted it? The judge asked. I didn't expect anything, Lillian said. But people saw it, and they recognized it. Recognized it. That was the turning point. Within hours of the video going online, it spread beyond the neighborhood. Strangers commented. News outlets requested interviews. The clip was replayed on talk shows, dissected in podcasts. Shared millions of times, Karen's laughter became a symbol of entitlement. Back in the courtroom, Judge Judy reviewed the timeline. Karen's termination from her job, her resignation from the HOA, the collapse of her social standing. Ems Whitmore, the judge said finally, consequences are not the same as defamation. The video is unedited. The statements are yours. Truth is an absolute defense. Karen's voice wavered. But my life is ruined. Judge Judy's gaze did not soften. Your life changed because people saw how you treated others. The gavel struck. Case dismissed. The room erupted in whispers as Karen sat frozen. Lillian exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. But the courtroom was only the beginning. Outside, reporters surrounded both women. Lillian declined interviews. She offered no triumphant speech. She simply said she hoped the matter was over. Karen, however, found no such peace. The footage followed her everywhere. Days passed, then weeks. The phone stopped ringing. The media moved on to fresher controversies. But the internet never forgets. Each time Karen opened her phone, her own face stared back at her, paused mid-law in countless memes. Her downfall, replayed in compilation videos titled "The Moment She Realized." Her laughter became her sentence. She moved out of the neighborhood shortly after the ruling. The new apartment was sparse, the furniture borrowed. The first night she slept there, the silence pressed in around her. In that silence, she heard it again, her own voice. That laugh, it echoed in her thoughts, relentless. For years, she had equated authority with superiority. She believed rules gave her power. She mistook fear for respect. Now there were no meetings to chair, no citations to issue, no doors to knock on with warnings in hand, just stillness. One morning, months later, she drove past her old street. Children were playing freely on the sidewalks. Bicycles lay scattered across lawns. Laughter rang out, bright and unrestrained. Where she once enforced silence, there was joy. Lillian stood in her garden, trimming sunflowers. Karen slowed her car. Their eyes met. There was no smugness in Lillian's expression, no victory, only a calm nod, a silent acknowledgement that the storm had passed. Karen nodded back, her grip tightening on the steering wheel before she drove away. That night, alone at her kitchen table, she stared at a stack of unopened mail. For the first time in years, there were no forms requiring her signature, no official notices awaiting her approval, no authority attached to her name. Only quiet, and beneath that quiet, regret, she whispered softly, almost as if confessing to the empty room. Maybe it's time to start over. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was the first honest admission she had made in years. As for Judge Judy, she never publicly revisited the case. Weeks later, during an interview, she was asked about the viral clip that had swept across the country. She smiled slightly and said, "Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be seen." Those words spread almost as quickly as the original video. They appeared beneath reposted clips, printed on shirts, shared in captions, because in that simple sentence, she reminded the public of something powerful, that truth does not require volume, it requires clarity. And clarity had been delivered in that courtroom. This story became more than entertainment. It became a lesson, a reminder that entitlement, no matter how secure it feels, eventually collapses under the weight of its own arrogance. That humiliation born from cruelty is louder, but far less lasting than accountability born from truth. Karen's journey did not end in applause. It ended in reflection. In the absence of authority, she was forced to confront who she was without it. Power had once defined her. Without it, she had to define herself. And that is often the hardest trial of all, the one that takes place not in a courtroom, but in silence, because justice is not always dramatic. It does not always roar. Sometimes it unfolds quietly, methodically, exposing what was always there, a laugh, a moment, a truth revealed. If you have ever stood on the receiving end of someone who wielded power like a weapon, remember this case. Remember that accountability may take time. It may arrive without fireworks or spectacle. But when it comes, it is unmistakable. The loudest voice in the room is not always the strongest. Sometimes the quietest verdict carries the greatest weight. And in this courtroom, justice did exactly that. It did not shout. It was simply seen.